Hi everyone, you're listening to Guts and Girl Bits. I'm Alison Mitchell, a practicing naturopath, and I hope to share with you all sorts of information about women's health and digestive health to educate and empower you to make informed choices about your own health. Please remember that all information is general and does not replace consulting with a healthcare practitioner. Hi everyone, you're listening to Guts and Girl Bits. Today, I'm joined with Jenn Malecha, and we'll be talking about things like how to deal with mould in the house and how mould can impact on your health. We'll be talking about different types of functional testing and the ways that you can get a really deep understanding of your health and well-being, particularly on a hormonal level. I'll give you a bit of background about Jenn before we get started. Jenn Malecha supports busy, health-minded professionals in taking back control of their health by giving them access to the right lab tests and resources so they can find the missing pieces of their health puzzle, actually fix what is wrong, and get back to feeling like themselves again. Using over a decade of personal training experience, training in functional diagnostic nutrition, and transformational coaching, she creates personalized health rebuilding programs for clients that are realistic and sustainable for long-lasting results and that empower clients to be the boss of their own health. If you're ready to look at the big picture of your health, not just one disconnected piece at a time, to embrace healthy as a way of being and to stop settling for anything less than you deserve when it comes to your health and happiness, then Jenn is exactly who you've been looking for. So thank you so much for being here, Jenn.
Yeah, Alison, thanks for having me. I'm excited to share information and inspire others so that they can also take back control of their health and feel like their best selves too.
Yeah, and that's just such a key thing, isn't it? In that people often do feel like they are losing control. And so much of what you do and what I do as a naturopath is empowering people. So I'm just so glad that there's people out there that do that.
Me too, because, if I hadn't come across somebody who could help me or the trainings that I've gone through, like I would still be stuck in suffering. And I just, don't think that anybody should have to settle for that. So I think it's what the work that we're both doing and being on this podcast and making this information available is just hugely valuable work because we want to give people, the opportunity to live their best life, essentially.
Yeah, exactly. So can you share a little bit about your personal health journey?
Sure. It started for me back in my 20s, really, is when my health started to decline. So when I went to college, I started to notice that, things just were not right in my body. I was developing really severe seasonal allergies and was kind of in a constant state of fatigue all of the time. And then I was diagnosed with skin cancer at a really young age with melanoma. And I was a personal trainer. I had studied fitness, nutrition, and health in college, and it just didn't really make sense to me about what was happening with my body. I started to kind of question, what I had been taught my whole life when it came to like health and diet and exercise. And I came across a wonderful program called Functional Diagnostic Nutrition that's for, health coaches or aspiring health coaches or health professionals out there. Anybody can take the course. And it really, when I came across that course, it all the pieces of the puzzle just kind of came together. It made a lot of sense. Like it looked at the body from a functional physiological perspective, more so than any schooling that I had ever received. And as a part of that program, you had to run some of the functional lab tests on yourself. And it really shed some light on what was going on with my body. I had adrenal dysfunction that was happening. All of my sex hormones were low. My liver was congested, so I wasn't eliminating toxins as well as I should have been. And I had really high oxidative stress. And a liver that's not functioning well and a backup of toxins in the body combined with really high oxidative stress is kind of like a recipe for disaster when it comes to cancer. And I really explained like why I had the couple spots of skin cancer that I did, considering the fact that there was no family history or anything that could really explained why I had the skin cancer otherwise. And also it explained or provided answers for me about why I was feeling so fatigued all the time, why my menstrual cycle was a mess, and why it was so difficult for me to, balance my weight, to maintain my weight, and some of the migraines and things that I were having too. One of the other tests that I did also showed that I had a pretty nasty overgrowth of H. pylori bacteria going on in my gut, which can cause, a bunch of negative side effects and can just be detrimental to your hormones and overall health too. So basically I was a mess on the inside, which is why I was not feeling well. And I set off on a journey to correct all of those imbalances and restore health to my body using just natural approaches with diet, rest, exercise, stress reduction, and supplementation. And by the time I reached 30 on my 30th birthday, I was feeling the best that I ever had in my entire life. Like I felt better at 30 than I did at 24 when I was diagnosed with skin cancer. And life was great. It was wonderful. I was at my best weight that I'd ever been. My energy was phenomenal. I just felt great all around. And then a little bit after I hit that peak moment in time, a couple of years after, like my health just started to decline again, and specifically related to hormones. Like I started having cystic acne all the time, and I'd never had acne in my entire life. I was having breakthrough periods. I even had at one point a 12-day menstrual cycle, and I was having really extremely painful breast tenderness that would happen around certain times of my cycle. And I had gone to a couple specialists to try and figure out what was happening, and nobody could really explain it to me. I mean, my right breast was so inflamed that you could feel heat coming off of it through 2 layers of clothing. And some of the health professionals that I had seen just said, "Oh, well, let's just keep an eye on it. We've never seen it like before." And I was scared out of my mind, thinking here I am having a history of skin cancer already. Maybe this is breast cancer, and nobody was really taking it seriously. I had mammograms done that didn't really show anything. And it was a really scary kind of point in my life, because my body had all of a sudden, even though I was doing all of the healthy things, my body literally seemed like it had just gone on the fritz, essentially. So I decided to apply just, my own work. I said, okay, if nobody else can help me, then I have to help myself. And I do this with clients all the time. And it's, it's always harder to be your own client, right? To treat yourself in some ways. And so I really sat down and just went over my case really thoroughly. I ran what's called a Dutch test, the dried urine total comprehensive hormone test. And it came back looking like
I love that test. Yeah.
Love that. And it looked like everything was kind of pointing towards the fact that I was estrogen dominant, but I still didn't know why that was happening. And just one day, actually on the 12th day of that 12-day period that I happened to open up the guest room closet door and notice that we had black mold on the ceiling in there. And I had no idea, that was there, that how long it had been there for. And that guest room was actually where my office was. So I was working, 8-hour days sitting next to black mold for who knows how long. And the mold toxins can mimic estrogen in the body. They become like a xenoestrogen essentially, and they can elevate estrogen levels. On top of, they suppress the immune system, and they can really wreak havoc on your gut in a lot of different ways. And so once I discovered that, I went and had some more testing done and found out that the elevated levels of estrogen and probably the mold toxins in my body had triggered Hashimoto's for me. So an autoimmune thyroid condition. And we immediately took action to remove the mold. And I instantly felt relief once I removed myself from that room in general and stopped working in there. And then it's been, quite a journey over the last couple of years. That was about in 2016, I think. And it's been, a journey over the last couple of years where just healing from that. Mold is pretty crazy. And once you have an autoimmune condition, it takes some time for the body to recuperate, but it is possible to do it. And I, finally feel like now in 2019, I'm like back to that 30-year-old feeling self where my body is completely like come back to life and my energy is better than it's ever been before again. And I actually probably feel better now than I did when I was 30 too, just because I've more intensely kind of worked on healing my body over a period of time. And that's kind of where I'm at, today, basically.
That is a big journey. Oh my gosh. Wow. And I feel that a lot of the things that you've talked about, so many women will be able to relate to as well, particularly that feeling where you almost just can't trust your body anymore. Until you were able to identify some of those things that drove your condition, like the mold, you realized, oh, my body didn't do this to itself, and it's actually been trying to support me this whole time, trying to deal with the mold. So, the mold, how did you deal with that? How did you get that out of your house?
Yeah. So when you have something like, toxic mold in your home, there's a very strategic way that you want to go about getting rid of it because it's very insidious. Mold spores can become airborne and then they can embed themselves in basically any type of porous material. And knowing that, that's an emotional roller coaster in itself. There definitely, as you were mentioning, there's this point of that you go through. I think a lot of us go through in any kind of health crisis or journey that we've had of, losing trust in our body and then working to regain that trust again. Well, I also went through that with my home, questioning, is my home ever going to be safe for me to be in again, knowing that I'm, one of those people out there that is probably more sensitive than others to mold. They say that only 1 out of 4 people has like the genetic makeup to really kind of get sick from mold, essentially. And I didn't even get as sick as most people can. But going back to your question, that you have to be really strategic about it. It does require hiring professional help so that they can come in and really like seal off and kind of contain the area that has the mold so it doesn't spread throughout the rest of the house as they work to remove it. So they have to airtight seal around the surface and they bring in these big, huge air scrubbers so that they're scrubbing the air while they're working through the process of removing the mold. And then they have to restore it and kind of let it all dry out. And then they come back and test it a couple days later to make sure that it's all gone. And once you've confirmed that it's all gone, then you kind of have to go through this process of cleansing the rest of the home. We had to have like our air ducts cleaned because, I mentioned can become airborne. And so then if you're using your, heating and air system, they can get up into the air ducts and you have to change out all your air filters. And then going through a process of, kind of cleaning all the surfaces in your home using something that will help to kill off the mold spores. And, what's unfortunate is that most people think that you use something like bleach or Clorox to kill mold, right? Like that's what probably most of our parents, or if you ask somebody on the street what they would use to kill mold, that's what they would probably say. And what really happens is bleach or Clorox, like some of those chemical solutions, they can actually, like the mold can mutate. And if you use those cleaning products, it can make it worse. So the best types of cleaning products to use are actually ones that are essential oils or botanical and citrus based. And so we got, detergent and spray for our furniture. And there's like a citrus solution that you can use that kind of like you go through and you fog each of your rooms so that it helps to cleanse the air that's in there. And now in our home, we have 2 really high quality HEPA air purifiers that we just run all the time because you never really know when mold will strike again. You can't really predict the roof leak or the pipe bursting in between the wall or what it's going to, what might happen. And so now I recognize, even the greater value of always just having like a really good air filter in your home, aside from, all the other toxins that it filters out for you, but just because you never know when mold might happen.
Constant vigilance.
Constant vigilance. Yes.
Yeah. Oh gosh. Yeah, that's such a process. It reminds me a little bit about how you have to go about removing asbestos. When I've done some renovations in my house, because I've had quite an old house, we've found some asbestos sheeting, and then you have to get the professionals in and they have to board up everything and do all sorts of stuff. But I think mold is almost a little bit more intense in the removal process because it can just like float around so readily, whereas asbestos doesn't do that.
Exactly.
Yeah. So what have you done your genetic typing to find out if you are one of those people that are sensitive to mold?
So the genetic typing, that you have to look at the HDLAR gene, and it's not as easy to decipher as you might think. So yes, I have done the testing, and it looks like I do possibly have that genetic factor. But genes are just essentially like a piece of the puzzle. Ultimately, like we can have all kinds of genes like MTHFR type of genes or COMT genes, and they can be dormant. They're not necessarily like turned on. So there's not really a way to tell necessarily if the gene is turned on or off. But what I could see was that I was having a chronic inflammatory response to the mold. So there are blood tests that you can run to look at certain metrics to see, like, is your body having a chronic inflammatory response to the exposure to the mold? So things like MSH and TGF beta 1 and VEGF, those types of markers. And those are not easy tests to necessarily get. They're not a common type of blood test, but if you can find the right physician to order the test for you, that's the first hurdle in getting them done. And then the second hurdle is they tend to be like very expensive because insurance doesn't necessarily cover them depending on where you are in the world or what your insurance looks like. So fortunately, I was able to find a physician, a naturopathic doctor that I could work with that could order some of those more advanced testing that I'm not able to access. And my insurance did cover part of it. And so I've retested them over time. And that's more telling because I could see when the first test was run, like the baseline, my, the markers were definitely elevated. And then over time, as we've removed the mold and I've implemented things to help my body heal, I've seen those markers come down over time as well.
Yeah. And I know those tests you're talking about, and they are quite expensive. Mm-hmm. And here in Australia, you can get them through a naturopath or a doctor as well, but they're not really claimable under Medicare, which is it's essentially like the government paying for certain health funds here in health things here in Australia. But it's not just of everything, isn't it? When you do have a chronic health condition, is you have to invest in your health and you have to invest in these tests and fine-tuning which functional tests you do actually go for is where the actual art of it is. So you've done quite a lot of work in actually identifying the right types of tests for each person and all of that as well, haven't you?
Yes, definitely. I mean, that's the important part too, is I always look at when I'm considering tests for, any of the clients that I'm working with is what are the tests that are going to kind of give us the most bang for our buck is what I say. Like, what's going to give us the most insights for whatever's going on with the scenario with that person and have the most value for the amount of money that they're going to be spending. Because you don't need to necessarily run a test for everything. That's one of the things that I love about the Dutch test, for example, is that that's a pretty easy test for a client to complete. And it is rich with so many insights. It not only tells you about hormones, but it can tell you about insulin resistance and give you insights about gut health and what's going on with the thyroid, even though there's not a marker for thyroid on there, but just based on what's happening with metabolized cortisol and 24-hour free cortisol, we can see, if the thyroid might be sluggish or not. So I really look for like those tests that bring a lot of value, but that don't necessarily bring a lot of cost. And also just understanding like how the body works too. Like I can talk to somebody and assume sometimes that there's probably a thyroid issue going on. But when you really think about, what would be impacting the thyroid, you still have to work on balancing cortisol and, estrogen and testosterone and working on cleaning up the liver and doing cleaning up the gut and improving gut health. So I don't usually run a thyroid test, even though I suspect thyroid issues, because I know that if I work on all those other areas of the body, that it's going to improve, it's going to have a positive impact on their thyroid health. And if we do some of that work initially and they're not making progress in the way that they should be or that I would expect them to, then I would go into some of the more advanced, deeper testing to see like what might be holding them back, because there's a lot that you can do with just some simple at-home functional lab tests and the information that you gain from them.
For sure. And, getting someone's symptoms and case history as well is one of the best ways you can fine tune that.
So that's where, like, if you're not a health coach or a practitioner, that's why working with someone is really important.
Exactly. Yeah, we kind of help them put together the pieces of the puzzle, and see the big picture of what's going on, and where you might not, be able to see it yourself as well, right? Like I know you probably do the same thing. Like I do a really thorough intake with my clients, their consultation in the beginning, and we start all the way back at the point of birth for their health history, because if they were a C-section baby or if they were not breastfed, those could be really important pieces of information that would tell you a lot about how their immune system was set up initially. Were they set up for success or not based on those instances? And then you can kind of see, somebody is C-section or not breastfed, then you can kind of see this pattern through their time where, as a young child, they got reoccurring ear infections or strep throat. And then in adolescence, when their menstrual cycle started, it started off with issues, kind of right away, like painful or irregular periods that moved into like, things that's just started to compile later in their life. And so you can really start to form an impression about what's going on with somebody when you do that really thorough, like history evaluation and what's kind of happening with some of the symptomology that they present and just correlating it all back to the person.
Yeah, and putting a timeline together is a really powerful tool for getting that understanding and unraveling the picture. And then you can go through and tease out different contributing causes, work on those, and eventually things just start to unravel and heal.
Exactly.
What are some of the major hormonal issues that you tend to see affecting women's health?
Well, I definitely, most people come to me and there's like probably some really common symptoms or health issues that they come to you with, right? Like a lot of it has to do with weight, especially women as they get into their 30s and their 40s. Typically, I see a lot of brain fog as well. A lot of like low energy is a common complaint. Or I tend to see a lot of people that have been diagnosed with an autoimmune condition and they're taking medication for it, but they're not feeling as great as they could be. And so then when they come to me with some of those, common issues, we then get into the testing. And what I often see a lot of times is estrogen dominance, which is way more probably common than it's talked about, and there's different types of estrogen dominance. You can have relative estrogen dominance, which means that your estrogen might be within normal range, but your progesterone is maybe on the lower side. So the estrogen is like actually relatively dominant compared to that progesterone. Or you can have like true estrogen dominance where your estrogen is actually really high. And I actually see this in both men and women. And I'm seeing it more and more in men, surprisingly, because of a lot of the, estrogen driving foods and chemicals and toxins that are in our environment, and because blood sugar balance can play a role in estrogen balance as well too. And we just are living in a society where people are eating really high carbohydrate or carbohydrate rich diets, not realizing that that's like disrupting their, insulin and blood glucose balances. And then compiled with that, I'll usually see, some low testosterone that's happening, and then some really just dysfunctional cortisol patterns. Like they can have really low metabolized cortisol, which means that the body's not producing much in the way of cortisol. And then when we look at their 24-hour free cortisol patterns, they're really wonky. Their circadian rhythms are flipped upside down sometimes, or just really, really low. So of course, they're suffering from energy or the inability to lose weight, mostly because they're inflamed, and our cortisol is our natural, inflammation or anti-inflammatory pain reliever. So they're just kind of like bloated and inflamed. But also the estrogen dominance will play a role in weight gain and the inability to lose weight. So I would say that those are the most common hormone issues that I see, the top ones, and then definitely thyroid dysfunction that's happening. But thyroid is, usually the symptom of something greater that's going on. Like I was mentioning before, where, you look at their liver function or what's going on with their intestinal health, and those are all factors as to why they usually have a sluggish thyroid. And so working to resolve some of that stuff helps boost their thyroid function like right away.
It's a bit like how you expressed with your personal health journey, how there's so many different interplaying things. Like there's very rarely a case where it's just, I have low testosterone and that's it. There's always something, so many other contributing factors involved. And yeah, those situations are so similar to the pictures I see in clinic as well. And yes, the high estrogen in men is really common, isn't it? And I think that's to do with the influence of all the plastics and chemicals in our environment. It's no wonder that we are seeing all of this testosterone converting over to estrogen way more than it should do. Okay, so you were talking about the cortisol picture in the Dutch test as well, and that's a really interesting thing that I've been observing with the Dutch test, because you can tell a lot more about how your cortisol is acting compared to saliva cortisol tests. Can you talk a little bit about that and about what sort of things you can interpret from the cortisol saliva test?
Yeah, this is why I love the Dutch test so much, and all the extra insights that it provides us. I mean, up until the Dutch test, definitely a salivary cortisol test was kind of the go-to cutting edge test, which is a great test also. And in some cases, doing a saliva test is still warranted and extremely valuable, especially when you're trying to look at something like the cortisol awakening response, which is something you can really only get through saliva. You can't get that through urine. But, I'll just use myself as an example, is that on a salivary test, my cortisol kept coming back looking tanked. And even though I was feeling like significantly better, and so that was just kind of puzzling on what was going on. But that was because, we look at a saliva test, we're only looking at that metabolized cortisol. And so it doesn't necessarily show like the 24-hour free cortisol. And what was happening is like my body produces, once I ran a Dutch test, I was able to see that my body produces, a smaller amount of that metabolized cortisol, but it actually utilizes cortisol really efficiently. And my 24-hour free cortisol patterns looked really good, actually, which would explain why, even though my metabolized cortisol looked like it was in the tank, that I was actually feeling better and really good. And so that's, just an example of some of the additional insights that it can give us. When we also look at the cortisol patterns, we can see, and we compare metabolized cortisol and 24-hour free cortisol, we can also see insights about what's going on with the thyroid, depending on how those numbers look. And then we can see that circadian rhythm of, how is the body outputting cortisol throughout the day? Like, how is it responding to the environment, or, responding to what's going on within itself as well. So we can see, like, are there spikes that are happening throughout the day? And like one of the things that I tend to see often is, a relative spike into the evening time. And so the person will complain that they, feel wired but tired, for example, at nighttime, like they have a hard time falling asleep, or they get a second wind at nighttime. And we can see that in the cortisol pattern, that their nighttime cortisol levels would be elevated or slightly elevated or relatively elevated compared to what the rest of the pattern looks like. And then that usually will highly correlate with what we see on a stool sample test also, because, we have to ask the question of, well, what is spiking cortisol at nighttime like that? It could be things like exposure to light, for example. But what I find that it correlates most strongly with usually is gut bugs, like some type of parasite, bacteria, or yeast over overgrowth because those organisms are nocturnal. So at nighttime when we're trying to get, ready for bed, they're just getting started for the evening. They're creating some internal stress that the body is then responding to, and then it's releasing cortisol as a result. And usually once we clean up whatever's going on in the gut, the person doesn't have that wired but tired feeling or that second wind at night. They're able to go to sleep fairly easily and sleep through the night. And then we also see those nighttime cortisol levels come down. And it's really cool when you can see the whole picture and how some of those pieces of the puzzle, get connected, basically.
I love it. It's such a great link to make there as well, because your gut health has such a big connection with everything else. And it's really fascinating how you can actually look at that test and go, I think that's to do with your gut bugs.
Mm-hmm.
There's a fair few other areas that your gut health can impact on your hormones and your overall health as well, isn't there?
Yes, there definitely is. Like, for example, if you have, low estrogen, for example, if low estrogen can actually contribute to leaky gut, or we also look at things like, if you have low hormones, like why is that happening? So if you have low estrogens or testosterones, or progesterone or DHEAS, that can be an indication that there's a degree of leaky gut or intestinal dysfunction that's happening. You're not absorbing nutrients very well in order to even produce hormones also. On the Dutch test, we also get to look at markers like some of the neurotransmitter markers like dopamine, and melatonin and norepinephrine and epinephrine, which those neurotransmitters are primarily produced within the intestinal lining also. So if any of those markers are off, then that can be an indication that there's gut dysfunction that's happening, that's creating an imbalance then inversely in some of those hormones. Especially like I love looking at melatonin. Melatonin, most people know of it as our sleep hormone, but it's also an antioxidant. And it's actually, just for comparison, about 200 times more powerful than vitamin C. So when we see like elevated levels of melatonin, that can be an indication that there's an infection somewhere in the body. And normally we'll see that infection kind of correlate with gut health. Like again, there's like a parasite or a bacteria or a yeast infection that's going on. And so the body is pumping out a lot of melatonin within the intestinal lining, to fight off that infection as an antioxidant, essentially. So the Dutch test really complements, what you might be seeing on a stool sample test, and then inversely as well. Like I think, like in my practice and working with clients, pretty much everybody who comes through and works with me, like everybody gets a Dutch test and everybody gets a GI map stool sample test so that we can really see this big picture of how the body's kind of interacting together.
Yeah, those are great tests to work on as a basis for everything as well. Do you have any other tests that you're a really big fan of for hormonal health or even for gut health?
Yeah, I'm also a really big fan of, there's a test by BioHealth Laboratories here in the US, and you can get it internationally as well. It's just a little bit more expensive, I think, for the shipping. But it's called the metabolic profile, and it looks at something called indepth. So you have to do like a challenge for the test the night before. You have to eat a certain amount of protein the night before to challenge the test. And then it looks at what the indepth marker is looking at is like how well you're digesting protein or not, which can give us insights about gut health. So it can give us insights like indications for maybe small intestinal bacterial overgrowth or H. pylori overgrowth, or just simply like absorption, like not being able to absorb or digest nutrients very well. So that can be really helpful and kind of correlate with some of the other findings that you might get. It also has a marker on there for urinary bile acids. So this helps us to look at the liver and how the liver is moving bile acids through or not. So that can like kind of indicate whether the liver is congested or if it's doing its job or not. And then it also has markers on there for lipid peroxides, which is oxidative stress. And what's interesting is like sometimes when I run a Dutch test, the Dutch test also has oxidative stress markers on there. Sometimes that in the metabolic profile test will complement each other, and sometimes they don't. And I think that's also interesting too, because anytime that we do a test, it's really only a snapshot in time. right? So you could do a test today and maybe you're just having a good day today. And maybe tomorrow you're not. So when we run, kind of multiple tests, even if they have similar markers and we're putting all the pieces of the puzzle together, it can be helpful to go back and look at some of those things. I'm also a really big fan of running a food sensitivities test with most clients. I love the Cyrex Labs or Vibrant Wellness. They have some really great food sensitivities tests because that also gives us insights on what's going on with gut health specifically. Like if you have a lot of food sensitivities that are happening, that can be, a symptom of gut dysbiosis or leaky gut that's happening. Like you have food particles that are now crossing in across the gut barrier that are getting into the bloodstream. The body's then reacting to them. And now you have antibodies against a food. So now you have a food sensitivity as a result of that. So then you can work on eliminating some of those foods for a period of time. That's going to help to cut down on inflammation and what's going on with leaky gut, and then be able to introduce them, at a later point in time once you've kind of worked on healing the gut. And that all relates back to the hormones again, because we know that the body is a network of systems. And so when one system of the body is dysfunctional, like you see all these food sensitivities and insights for leaky gut that are happening, then you know that the hormones are also being affected by that. You can't just look at one piece of the body. You have to look at all of the systems of the body and understand, what exactly is happening.
Yeah, looking at all of those different factors just gives you that complete picture. But it's so tricky, isn't it? Because it does add up in costs, and many people find that they just can't really achieve it. So I personally find that like I pick and choose what I need. Some people don't get any functional testing, and we have to purely work with just, case taking alone. Do you have many people that are like that?
I do. That always have that as an option, for people that are really tight, with a budget or funds. And we do a really thorough intake process in case note taking, like you said, and generally, you can look at their lifestyle, right? Because it all comes back to lifestyle. Like you get even if when you're running a test, the tests are just helping to guide, your recommendations for diet, rest, exercise, stress reduction, supplementation. So, as we've been trained in our line of work, you can pretty much like evaluate anybody and see where they can improve aspects of their diet, their sleep, their exercise, stress reduction, and give them some pretty basic supplements. Like there's, some standard supplements that I believe everybody should be taking for the most part that are just going to support function in the body. And they would see improvements without having to do, any type of lab testing. Are they going to, heal everything completely? Maybe or maybe not, because depending on where their voids are, like if they truly have like some type of, just dysfunction that's going on, you may need a lab test to really pick that up. But I think for the majority of the people that are out there, by making some of those changes to their lifestyle, like they're going to see improvements,
Yeah, that's right. And you can always look at doing the tests later on, as you've said previously, if things don't progress as you want them to.
Exactly.
And when you're taking the case, what are some of the key symptoms that you're looking out for as a sign of hormonal imbalances?
Well, that's a tricky question because symptoms can be far removed from the root cause, right? So you can,
Yes.
let's take like acne, for example. Like most people would relate acne to a hormone imbalance of some sort, but it can also be an indication of a food sensitivity. Like I just had a female client come work with me. She's a young 20-year-old and dealing with chronic like cystic acne. And we did a food sensitivity test, and she, out of 170 foods, she was like sensitive to like 50 foods on there. And so we started cleaning up the foods and the acne started going away. Or acne could also be related to a detoxification issue. We have skin issues like that. It's a sign that the body's trying to expel something usually. So it could be like a toxin in your environment or a clogged liver, potentially. So, it's really hard to nail down like what exactly is a hormone symptom or not. like, so I think if I was to generalize, I would definitely say weight gain, fatigue, acne would be probably like the top 3 issues that I see people coming through with. And then sleep disorders, like sleep issues, when they have low progesterone or high estrogen going on, or dysfunctional cortisol levels, like they are not sleeping well, like they're, have insomnia of some sort, or just never feel rested with their sleep cycles.
Yeah, that's right. You're right. It is a tricky question. It's a very good snapshot of how we do look at it as well, and that you've got to look at all of the way that's different. Also, so can you give us a recommendation that, say, you've got someone that just really wants to work to balance their hormones in general? Do you have 1 or 2 recommendations that they can do to support that pathway?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that if I was to list 3 things that you can do to start doing today, the first thing would be to, move towards an anti-inflammatory diet. Stop fueling the inflammation that's probably going on in the body already, that's going to be disruptive to your intestinal lining and the balance of the hormones. So that would be, some of the primary inflammatory foods that I have my clients eliminate would be gluten, dairy, soy, sugar, and then alcohol, especially things like soy and alcohol, which can drive, estrogen specifically. So we see like alcohol use can drive like E3, on the Dutch test specifically in there. And we don't want that to be happening. There's already plenty of estrogen dominance factors in our environment. We don't need to be adding those necessarily. And then sleep would be my second, probably. I should almost list that one as first, I guess I should say. Like, I think we need to learn to value sleep more than diet and exercise in a lot of cases, because you could be eating healthy, but if your sleep is dysfunctional or, erratic in any kind of way, then all of your efforts with diet and exercise kind of go to the wayside. And so it's really important for us to be sleeping according to a natural circadian rhythm, which means being asleep, not just in bed, but actually asleep by about 10 p.m. most nights of the week, which would mean like 5 nights out of the week. I mean, that's how our ancestors were. We live in a society now where there's artificial light and artificial temperature, so we can trick our bodies into thinking that the sun is still up when that's not how it's necessarily meant to be. If you were, out camping, for example, or on a vacation somewhere, remote, you would probably find that your body attunes to that natural rhythm of the sun. And that's how our circadian rhythm is meant to be and how we're supposed to be sleeping. And so when you're sleeping according to a natural circadian rhythm, like a sleep by 10 p.m. and then waking up, somewhere between 4 to 6 a.m. in the morning, getting a good solid like 6 to 8 hours of sleep, you're going to notice some huge shifts in how you're feeling, and your diet therefore is then going to be more effective. It's going to help to balance your cortisol rhythm, which will then have a positive effect on the rest of the hormones in your system as well. And I think the third thing that I would recommend for people out there is to, really take a look at your stress, and not just emotional stress, but also like physical stressors on your body, because those things can start to accumulate really quickly. So we have mental, emotional stress, like the relationships in our life or work, but we also have physical stress, such as, over exercising or getting up and doing a really hard workout after having a night of poor sleep or staying up late. So the body's already in a depleted state, and then we get up and we go push it even harder. And then that can have a negative impact on our cortisol and our circadian rhythm and our natural hormone balance too. And I just see a lot of people doing that. I know I was one of those people, like I was guilty of that because I came from a personal training background. So my mentality for a long time was always like to push harder, work harder, burn more calories. And I really had to shift that mindset, especially when I was working on dealing with reversing my Hashimoto's, because my body just needed to rest. And I cut way back on my exercise intensity. And when I finally did that, I started making leaps and bounds and restoring my hormone health and getting my thyroid back on track.
I think we've covered so much amazing information today, and I think you are a wealth of information. I'm sure that everyone who is listening is going to be so empowered and have so many ideas about things that they can do to move forwards with their health if they're dealing with issues with their health that are similar or along the lines of what we've talked about. If people do want to learn more or get in contact with you, where's the best place for them to do that?
Yeah, they can find me on social media. So either on Facebook or Instagram. My handle is Holistic Health Boss, and holistic is with a W, like the whole person. So Holistic Health Boss. Or they can also find me on my website. I love to blog about all the things that we've been talking about today. And I have some free resources like pre-recorded webinars and things like that for people to grab. And that would be at holistichealthboss.com.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much again for sharing all of this amazing information. So thank you everyone else for listening. I hope that you've enjoyed today's episode. Please jump on and leave us a review as well. And if you have any questions, then please put them through too. And if there's anything you want to hear about in the future, let me know. So thanks everyone, and thank you so much, Jen. Bye everyone.
Thank you.